they tell Vladimir Putin that they've captured this territory. The reality is they haven't captured anything. Ukraine has destroyed about $4 billion worth of Russian air defenses. This is a disaster for Russia. It's about survival. It's about buying time and turning every meter of ground into a deadly obstacle course. A meat grinder for the Russian meat. While Russia deflects and blames America and Ukraine for the lack of progress in ending the war, indicators and warnings show that there are significant military developments taking place in Ukraine and across Europe. I'm Philip Ingram, and this is Battle Plans Exposed. We're now coming to the end of the fourth consecutive year of high-intensity warfare. Donald Trump has set a deadline of June for a peace deal. Vladimir Putin has given no sign of compromise on his maximalist and outrageous demands. But the reality on the ground is that the Russian army advance is at the slowest pace we've seen in more than 100 years of warfare. In this episode, we'll take a look at what may be the most strategically vital strikes by Ukraine, as Russia prepares a massive spring or summer offensive with up to 100,000 troops. They're about to hit a wall. We'll dive into the new formidable $2 billion defensive lines that are being built across the Donbas and await Putin's disastrous meat wave and armoured column attacks. But first, let's take a look at some clips from the front lines. If ever there was a sign of desperation, the Russians putting garden sheds out with flailing wires over their tanks to try and stop drones in their latest anti-drone technology. It means you can't fight an armoured fighting vehicle the way you want to. It shows the desperation that there is in trying to defeat the threats that are provided by drones on the battlefield. It shows that the Ukrainian drones are dominating against the Russian armour. So here we have a Russian Gabera drone over the city of Sumy, launching an FPV drone off its back. This is showing that the Russians are trying to innovate in their use of the Gabera, a sort of Shahad-type drone, acting as a mothership, transporting an FPV drone into Ukrainian territory. This is yet another example of the race for innovation and technology, and how innovation and technology is influencing the battlefield. And in our final video today, mobility across the battle space is critical. And this is where the Russians have jumped on snowmobiles, using the terrain properly, but it's to get small teams in very fast. However, whenever they're attacked by the Ukrainians, it shows their discipline and morale. Over half the team are captured and taken as prisoners of war. And this is a clear indication of the morale that there are with the Russians. As soon as they come up against anything that is difficult, surrender is easiest for them. Or maybe it's a recognition that if they don't surrender, they're going to lose their lives. So let's begin by looking at the latest in the Zaporizhzhia direction. So, Zaporizhzhia, this is the new hotspot. We have Huliaipole in this area here, where there is fighting going on. But on a tactical level, we're seeing an uptick in what I'll call fly the flag operations by Russia. They take a small group of people, they infiltrate them through Ukrainian defensive lines. They're carrying a flag. They get as far as they can. They fly that flag over a building or in a village. They take a photograph. That photograph is geolocated. Their commanders then get a bonus because they can say they have captured that territory. The generals that are in charge of the different commanders get another bonus because they've captured more territory. And of course, they tell Vladimir Putin that they've captured this territory. This is what we have seen go disastrously wrong in other parts of the front line. The reality is they haven't captured anything. They've stuck a flag up in a building somewhere behind Ukrainian lines. Ukrainians tend to find out about it and push them out very quickly indeed. It's a reflection on what the front line is like. It is not a linear forward line of own troops where you can say the enemy are here, friendly forces are here, and people have got through defensive lines in one particular point. It's a reflection of the impact that drone warfare is having, where the front line now is 15 to 20 kilometers deep and actually troops are mishmashed together throughout that 20 or 30 kilometers of depth, mishmashed from both sides, not one side or the other. The Russians are exploiting it for bonuses, for financial reasons. They claim they've caught territory and captured territory. The reality is they haven't. Huliaipole is a clean-up operation. Mop-up continues across its axis. The Ukrainians' 33rd Separate Assault Regiment confirms it has cleared the village of Kostivtist of Russian forces during a counter-sabotage operation. The unit reports the settlement is now under full control of Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian forces struck a Russian logistic base behind Russian lines in Novomykolavka on the Huliaipole axis. The site stored improvised Russian transport used by the Russian units. A few cars, a few motorcycles, and we can see at the back some horses. We've seen this time and time again, and it indicates a collapse in information and military command, a collapse in the logistics, the failure to supply military vehicles for resupply, or is it the danger of using military vehicles and the desire to use civilian vehicles and hide amongst the civilians? That in itself a war crime. Now, speaking of false reports, communication is vital on the battlefield, and one of the things that the Russians have been doing in their innovation is getting Starlink, Elon Musk's satellite communications capability. However, this is now beginning to impact them because in early February, SpaceX blocked the use of every Starlink geolocated on Ukrainian territory, including the ones used by Ukrainian forces. And only after verification and inclusion into what is named as a whitelist that is updated every 24 hours can they be brought back online. This is to try and identify the Starlinks that are on the good side that the Ukrainians are using against those that the Russians are using. And we've even seen Starlinks in some of the UAVs that have been flying against Ukrainian territory to try and stop them from being blocked by Ukrainian electronic warfare. So as Starlink fails, as ever, the Russians are trying to innovate around it. The Russians have got a good, strong space program, and Putin has pushed, suggested, is trying to create a Starlink alternative. However, the Russians don't have the real ability to bring in the technology that's needed to put this together in the timeline that's needed to impact the tactical battle that's going on today. This is a very long-term commitment, and whether the Russians will be able to do it or not is very questionable. So whilst all this is going on, Zaporizhzhia, the new hotspot on the front line, reports in the last 24 hours from Russian telegram channels are that the Ukrainians have actually advanced up to 18 kilometers in some parts of the front line. The Ukrainians have not confirmed this, but for the Russians to be saying it, they've no reason to be lying. They've no reason to be suggesting that the Ukrainians are doing as well as they are. And when the Ukrainians keep silent, it usually means that they're having some success. Now let's look up at the skies in Ukraine as something critical is happening. Over the past year, Ukraine has destroyed about $4 billion worth of Russian air defences. On an operational level, this is a disaster for Russia. Unit Alpha, an elite special operations task force, has been credited with this astonishing result. Radar, command elements, as well as long and short range missile systems have all been taken offline by this crack team. The Donbas, Crimea, Huliaipole, all have had strikes reported on these prize targets, blinding the Russian command from Ukrainian attacks in the sky. This is what, in military terms, we describe as suppression of enemy air defences. The Ukrainians are suppressing the Russian air defences. But why? Russian-held territory is now exposed further to the rear. This means that long-range Ukrainian drones can get through and strike more targets with more success. It also means that Ukrainian fixed-wing manned air systems can get closer to the front line and have a greater effect on the front line, but also potentially then reach over it into the Russian rear areas. You have to suppress an enemy's air defence to create what's called local air superiority over an area you want to fly your air assets, whether they be drones or whether they be manned. The skeleton air defense leaves Russia vulnerable. It's stretched and it gives the Ukrainian what I described as local air superiority. Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter jets can operate with more freedom on the front and provide vital air support for the ground troops. They can move from intercepting missiles and drones at the rear to delivering close air support with devastating hammer bombs. All of this will and is making Putin think twice about his next move. Russian troops are concentrating along Ukraine's eastern and southern borders, specifically targeting Pokrovsk, which they've been trying to capture for over a year, and I expected it to fall before Christmas. It hasn't yet. Ukraine is holding on. But also targeting now into the Huliaipole sector and around Zaporizhzhia, this new area of frontline that is becoming the hotbed of activity. The offensive is expected to begin in late spring and in the east, targeting Sloviansk and Kramatorsk in the Donetsk region, the Donetsk Oblast, before then shifting south in early summer into the Zaporizhzhia region. Whether the Russians are going to be able to carry out an offensive within these two regions or whether they're going to focus and concentrate on only one is up for debate at the moment, but we're watching it closely. The secondary push towards Zaporizhzhia and Orikhiv aims to draw Ukrainian forces away from the main eastern front because Putin still wants to capture the whole of the Donbas as his number one priority. How much longer Putin can keep this bloody, attritional and costly war going is the key question. The other thing we have to recognise is the fact that during the winter months, Putin can't use his armoured forces, he can't use his vehicles to good effect, and therefore they will be withdrawn behind the front line so they can be refurbished. They'll be concentrated in particular areas, and as soon as the ground is right for vehicles to be used again, we will see the offensive starting. This has happened last year, it happened the year beforehand. And whether the Russians can generate sufficient combat power to punch through the Ukrainians or not is debatable. They haven't done it before, it's unlikely they're going to do it now. So what we're seeing is Russia suggesting and manoeuvring for an offensive at a time when diplomacy is going for peace. Zelensky is giving ground and is giving concessions to the Russians for negotiations. The Russians aren't doing anything. Every time they talk peace, they still bomb Kyiv, Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia. We've even seen missiles hitting Lviv in the east. Kherson, Odessa are all getting hit by the Russians as they suggest they want peace from Ukraine. It's unlikely in what we're seeing here that we're going to have any move towards peace through the rest of this year. Economically, Russia's in dire straits with declining energy income, and Putin has raided Russia's national funds with over $50 billion spent so far to keep his war going. His so-called shadow fleet, the rust bucket tankers that transport oil around the world, are being targeted more and more in coordinated seizures across Europe, in the Atlantic, in the Americas, the Mediterranean and elsewhere. And a $73 billion deficit in Russia was reported at the end of 2025. How is that translating into the average Russian? Well, think cucumbers. In the last week, it's been reported that cucumbers have increased 425% in price. So as Russia prepares for offensive operations, Ukraine is preparing its defences. Across Ukraine's war-torn east, a new kind of battlefield is rising from the mud. A vast defensive network described by analysts as a multi-billion-dollar iron belt. Ukraine's $2 billion defensive line isn't about dramatic breakthroughs, it's about survival, it's about buying time and turning every metre of ground into a deadly obstacle course. A meat grinder for the Russian meat. This isn't one giant wall, it's a deep defensive system stretching across key regions. Hundreds of kilometres of trenches, anti-tank ditches, barbed wire and concrete dragon's teeth, all interspersed with anti-personnel and anti-tank mines, and where possible, covered by direct fire weapons and indirect fire weapons if direct fire is not possible, designed to choke off Russian advance. And instead of relying on huge troop numbers, Ukraine is building up layer upon layer of engineered resistance. A battlefield maze. The idea is simple: turn every meter into a trap. The minefields slow vehicles. The anti-tank ditches halt armour. The wire barriers stop infantry. Deep trenches and bunkers hidden from drones allow the Ukrainian infantry to operate out of sight. Constant drone surveillance to spot enemy troops or columns long before they attempt to go through the barrier are providing the eyes to target in the direct fire, or in more cases, the indirect fire on those Russian concentrations before they come into the barrier. Once attackers are slowed, Ukrainian artillery and FPV drones strike from concealed positions. As we're seeing, modern trenches are smaller than we'd have expected in the past. They're camouflaged, they're protected against aerial surveillance, they're a response to the drone domination. These defensive lines are protecting Ukraine. They're in the areas that Vladimir Putin is asking to be ceded to him as part of any peace settlement. And why does Putin want those ceded to him? It's territory that he has already told the Russian people he owns. He doesn't. It's territory that he knows he can't capture militarily without huge cost. British military intelligence, defence intelligence has assessed another 4 years and 2 million casualties to get through the defensive lines in the disputed Donbas region in Donetsk Oblast alone. Zaporizhzhia is another factor in there. Putin can't afford that. And that is why he's holding out and not giving any concessions. He wants the territory he can't capture. Zelensky knows he can't give this up because this is protecting the rest of Ukraine. So thank you for watching this episode of The Sun's Battle Plans Exposed. Please subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any content, and like and share it across your networks. Get other people to come in and watch it. And of course, if you've got any comments or ideas, please put them in the comments below, and we'll try and address them in different episodes. So I look forward to seeing you again in the next episode. Thank you. Goodbye.